Hello, it's Toaster Party, and today I'm going to talk about what my picks are for the 5 best Jumpstart 2022 cards are for CEDH. So there's a lot of cards in this set, most of which are reprints, and of the cards that weren't, most of them were more built for fun instead of for power. But there are a handful of ones that are pretty interesting for CEDH. So without further ado, let's get into that list. Starting things off with number 5, Lita Mechanical Engineer. For 2 generic and a white, you get a legendary artifact creature with Vigilance that says at the beginning of your end step, untap each other artifact creature you control. So, you can also use the other ability of paying 3 generic and white to tap it to create a 5/5 colorless vehicle artifact token named Zeppelin with flying and crew 3. So what makes this card pretty interesting is, well, mono white stacks, specifically rule of law stacks. Because basically you can keep using this ability over and over to be able to make those Zeppelins, and as long as your creatures are big enough, you're going to be able to take out your opponents pretty quickly, giving them less time to be able to break out of rule of law. And the other cool thing is that this card can both crew a Zeppelin and then make one during the later turns. And now let's move on to number 4, Distinguished Conjurer. For 1 generic and a white, you get a human wizard that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. You can also pay 4 generic and a white to tap it to exile another target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its control. So basically this is just another Soul Sister effect for the life gain ad nauseum decks. I know they're not super meta relevant, and it just really helps to have just another one of these kind of pieces that they can put into the deck, and that's not horribly overcosted. This one's more interesting because it comes with the additional upside of being able to blink a creature, and I don't know if there's any version of that deck that currently exists in Mardu, but if it does exist, then this can also be used to double up a dockside trigger to get even more treasures to work with when trying to do an ad nauseum turn. It also can be used in the variant that I know more about, that being the Orzhov one with Karlov, to be able to try protecting the Karlov if you don't want to have to end up recasting it. But it does mean that its counters will be reset. But now let's move on to number 3, Kibo Uktabi Prince. For 2 generic and a green, you get a legendary Monkey Noble that says each player creates a colorless artifact token named Banana with sacrifice this artifact, add red or green, and you gain 2 life. It also says whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control that's either an ape or a monkey. It also says whenever Kibo attacks, defending player sacrifices an artifact. So this card is weird, to put it lightly, but what this card is pretty interesting for is for just dual stacks, because it is both a sort of ramp piece, and it also can be used versatilely for artifact destruction on your opponent's key artifacts, as long as they don't have just a ton of treasure sitting around. It also helps because this card pumps itself, and also other apes or monkeys, though I doubt you'll be playing many of those in your CEDH decks. It's an interestingly designed card, and while it's not being put in an overly powerful deck, it is definitely an interesting piece to try out there. Let's move now to number 2, Creeping Bloodsucker. For a generic and a black, you get a vampire creature that says at the beginning of your upkeep, Creeping Bloodsucker deals 1 damage to each opponent, and you gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. So this is again another one of those cards that's good in the life gain ad nauseum deck. I think this card, though, is far more interesting than Distinguished Conjurer because A, it's in a better color, because you're going to be playing this in an ad nauseum style deck, and it also gains you more life initially, and the other one requires a lot more setup. This also is more interesting because it already has a deck, even if that life gain ad nauseum deck isn't that great, because this card also fits into Belby, because it has that deal damage to opponents effect that Belby really wants to see, because it starts adding generic mana to your mana pool. It's overall a much more interesting card than Distinguished Conjurer. Now let's move on to number 1, Ogre Battlecaster. For 2 generic and a red, you get a Ogre Shaman with First Strike that says whenever Ogre Battlecaster attacks, you may cast target instant or sorcery from your graveyard by paying 2 red in additional to its other cost. And if that spell would be put into a graveyard, exile it instead. And when you cast that spell, Ogre Battlecaster gets plus X plus O until the end of turn, where X is that spell's mana value. So this card is a pretty interesting recursion piece, as whenever it attacks, you're able to flash back a spell, basically. So the place that I think this is going to be most interesting is in those Izzet Jeskai plus control decks, because this card can be used to flashback tutors, be that stuff like Merchant Scroll, Mystical Tutor, Enlightened Tutor. It also can be used to buy back other interesting effects like Dockside Doublers. So if you already have a Dockside that you've just played, you're going to be able to get a lot more mana out of it. Overall, just a very interesting card that fits in a decent number of more decks than a lot of the other cards in this set, because this set definitely has cards that are for specific decks. Well, that's all I had to say. Thank you all for watching. Hope you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you all have an excellent day.